The principal laughed and said, "If this black boy plays the piano, I quit." The whole academy burst into laughter, but in just a few moments, that same boy was about to silence them all, change his destiny, and make history. Let's continue this story. The entire Jefferson Music Academy was buzzing that morning. Students crowded the grand old hallway, their chatter echoing against the tall windows and marble floors. Everyone knew something unusual was about to happen. It wasn't just a regular assembly. Today, a challenge was thrown, a promise made, and a legend unknowingly put to the test. The principal, Mr. Reynolds, had laughed in front of the teachers, his voice loud enough for the students to overhear. "If this black boy can play the piano, I'll quit my job today." The words traveled faster than wildfire, twisting into whispers and roars of laughter that filled every corner of the academy. They said it like a joke, like it was impossible, like Marcus, the quiet boy who sat in the back of the classroom, could never touch the keys of the academy's grand piano. Marcus walked slowly into the Jefferson Music Academy auditorium, his heart pounding, but his face calm. He had always been quiet, often mistaken for shy, but those who really looked at him knew something burned behind his eyes. For months, he had been sneaking into the old practice rooms, staying late after classes, teaching himself to play on the broken upright piano that most students didn't even bother with. No one had guided him, no famous teacher had trained him. His teacher was persistence, his companion was passion. While others slept, Marcus's fingers had danced across the worn-out keys until the sounds turned into melodies, and melodies into songs. Now, standing before the entire student body and staff, with the polished grand piano of the Jefferson Music Academy gleaming under the stage lights, Marcus knew this was the moment that could change everything. The students whispered, some mocking, some curious, while Principal Reynolds leaned back in his chair, smirking. He thought it would be a moment of comedy, a boy stumbling, failing, making a fool of himself. He never imagined it could be the opposite. Marcus sat down, his fingers hovering above the keys. The room fell silent, the kind of silence that feels heavy, charged with expectation. He closed his eyes, not to block them out, but to fall into the music that had lived in his soul for years. Then, with one deep breath, he pressed the first chord. What came next silenced every whisper, every laugh, every doubt. The notes were not hesitant. They were strong, alive, and beautiful. The sound filled the auditorium like a wave washing over the crowd. It wasn't just music, it was storytelling without words. His fingers flew across the keys, weaving harmonies and rhythms that carried raw emotion, the kind that could make a person's chest tighten and eyes water without knowing why. Students who had been laughing seconds ago now leaned forward, mouths open in shock. Teachers exchanged glances, realizing they were witnessing something rare, something extraordinary. Even the principal's smirk slowly faded, his posture stiffening as if he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing or hearing. For Marcus, this wasn't just playing. This was years of silence breaking open, years of being overlooked and underestimated pouring out through every note. He wasn't just proving them wrong. He was proving to himself that all the nights he had stayed up practicing, all the times he had felt invisible, were worth it. By the time he reached the crescendo, the air in the Jefferson Music Academy auditorium felt electric. Students were no longer whispering. They were holding their breath. Some clutched their seats, some covered their mouths, unable to hide their shock. When the last note finally rang and faded into silence, there was no laughter, no mockery, only stunned silence. Then, slowly, the silence broke. Not with clapping at first, but with a single cheer from the back of the room, then another, then a wave of applause that grew louder and louder until the entire auditorium was shaking with it. Marcus stood, his face calm but his eyes shining. He hadn't just played the piano. He had shaken the walls of Jefferson Music Academy with a truth no one could deny. He was not just a student, not just a boy. They had been sitting in the presence of a legend. And at that very moment, as the cheers grew louder, Principal Reynolds sat frozen in his chair. His own words echoed in his head. "If this black boy can play the piano, I'll quit my job today." For the first time in his long career, the principal didn't know what to say. The applause inside Jefferson Music Academy refused to die down. It wasn't the polite kind of clapping teachers gave at school recitals. It was thunderous, raw, and full of disbelief. Students stood on their feet, cheering, some even whistling, as if they had just witnessed a world-class concert instead of a simple school performance. Marcus, still standing by the piano, looked out over the sea of faces. For the first time in his life, he felt truly seen. But not everyone was cheering. Principal Reynolds sat rigid, his jaw tight, trying to hide the storm inside his chest. He had always believed in control, in order, in setting limits for his students. To him, Marcus had always been just another kid, quiet and unremarkable, someone to ignore. And yet, here he was. This boy had just undone years of prejudice and doubt with a single performance. Reynolds remembered his own words, his foolish promise, and a bead of sweat formed at his temple. Meanwhile, the students swarmed Marcus as he stepped off the stage. "Bro, where did you learn that?" one asked, wide-eyed. "Do you take secret lessons?" another questioned. Marcus only smiled, shaking his head. "No lessons. Just practice." His answer stunned them even more. At Jefferson Music Academy, almost every student had private tutors, mentors, or years of training. The idea that Marcus, someone they had dismissed, had taught himself seemed impossible. A teacher named Mrs. Thompson, who had been at the academy for over 20 years, approached him. Her eyes were shining. "Marcus," she whispered, "do you realize what you just did?" He looked at her, puzzled. "I just played." She shook her head. "No, child. You just reminded us what music truly is. It's not about perfect technique or expensive lessons. It's about soul. And you have it." Word of the performance spread through the Jefferson Music Academy faster than any rumor ever had. By lunchtime, students who hadn't even been in the auditorium were replaying the story, each retelling making Marcus sound even more legendary. Some claimed his fingers moved faster than they could see. Others swore they felt chills run down their spines. The legend of Marcus was being written in real time. But with fame came resistance. A group of older students, who had always been praised as the Academy's stars, didn't like the attention Marcus was getting. To them, he was still an outsider, someone who didn't belong to their world of competitions, scholarships, and elite recognition. One of them, Jason, a tall senior who had been the Academy's golden boy pianist, sneered as he watched the crowd around Marcus. "So now everyone's acting like he's a genius? He just played one piece. Big deal." His friends nodded, but even in their agreement, there was an uneasy silence. Deep down, they knew Marcus had touched something that Jason's flawless but soulless playing never had. That afternoon, Principal Reynolds called Marcus into his office. The boy walked in quietly, sitting across from the large oak desk where the principal leaned back, arms crossed. "Marcus," Reynolds began, his tone forcefully calm. "You played, well today, but don't let it get to your head. One performance doesn't make you special. Do you understand?" Marcus met his gaze steadily. "I didn't play to be special. I played because I love it." The simplicity of the answer rattled Reynolds more than any defiance could have. After Marcus left, Reynolds sat alone in his office, staring at the piano trophy on his shelf from decades ago. He had once been a pianist himself, before becoming principal. He remembered the nights of practice, the hunger for recognition, the way his own dreams had faded when the world didn't see him as exceptional. Watching Marcus had awoken something he thought was long buried, jealousy mixed with regret. But instead of inspiring him, it hardened him. He decided then that Marcus would not be allowed to overshadow him in his own academy. The next day, an announcement echoed through the Jefferson Music Academy halls. "Attention students. This Friday, we will hold a special performance contest. Our best pianists will showcase their talent on stage. Everyone is encouraged to attend." Though it was framed as an opportunity, everyone knew what it was. A challenge, a test to see if Marcus's brilliance was real or just a lucky moment. When Marcus heard the news, he felt a knot in his stomach. He had never performed in a competition before. He wasn't trained in the Academy's polished methods, didn't know the standard repertoires others had been practicing for years. But as he sat alone at the old piano in the practice room, he closed his eyes and remembered his mother's words. "One day, the world will see your music." She had always believed in him, even when no one else had. On the day of the contest, the auditorium at Jefferson Music Academy was packed. Parents, students, even local reporters filled the seats. Principal Reynolds sat in the front row, his expression unreadable. The performers went one by one. Jason played flawlessly, his fingers precise, the audience polite. Other students followed, each polished, each technically perfect, but none stirring the crowd beyond courtesy. Then came Marcus's turn. As he stepped onto the stage, the audience leaned forward, curious, expectant. He sat at the grand piano once again, took a deep breath, and began. This time, he didn't just play. He poured everything into the music. The struggles, the nights alone, the laughter he had endured, the promise he had made to himself never to give up. His music told a story of pain and resilience, of hope and triumph. By the time he finished, the entire auditorium was on its feet, tears in some eyes, cheers filling the room. The legend of Marcus at Jefferson Music Academy had just grown even bigger. The ovation after Marcus's performance was unlike anything Jefferson Music Academy had witnessed before. Parents stood with tears in their eyes, students screamed his name, and even teachers who had spent years perfecting young musicians found themselves clapping harder than ever. It was no longer about a student surprising his classmates. It was about a boy rewriting the definition of talent right in front of their eyes. But not everyone was happy. Jason, the Academy's golden boy, watched from the side of the stage, his fists clenched. He had played with precision, with years of training, yet the applause he received felt hollow compared to the eruption Marcus had inspired. For the first time, Jason realized his reign at the top of Jefferson Music Academy was under threat. And the threat didn't come from another prodigy groomed by teachers, but from someone who had taught himself, someone the world had overlooked. After the contest, Marcus tried to slip quietly through the hallways, avoiding the crowd that kept calling his name. Fame, even at school, felt overwhelming. He wasn't used to attention, wasn't used to people suddenly wanting to be around him. That's when Mrs. Thompson, the veteran teacher, found him. "Marcus," she said softly, touching his shoulder. "Do you know what you've just done?" He smiled shyly. "I played, ma'am." She shook her head, her voice trembling. "No. You gave these students something they will never forget. You showed them music with a soul, and you reminded the rest of us what we've been missing." But while the students celebrated, Principal Reynolds retreated to his office, slamming the door behind him. His pride was wounded, his authority shaken. The promise he had made publicly, "If this black boy plays the piano, I'll resign today," rang in his ears. He had never expected Marcus to succeed, and now his own words threatened to humiliate him. Resigning would mean admitting defeat. Staying would mean facing whispers and laughter about his failed challenge. For a man who built his identity on control, either option felt unbearable. That night, Marcus returned home to his small bedroom where the second-hand keyboard waited for him. His mother, who had worked double shifts just to afford that keyboard years ago, hugged him tightly. "Marcus," she whispered, "today the world finally heard what I've always known. You're special." He smiled, but inside, he was torn. The attention, the expectations, the jealousy, it all weighed heavily. He had only ever wanted to play for the love of music, not to become a symbol or a rival. Meanwhile, Jason's jealousy began to twist into something darker. In the cafeteria the next day, he cornered Marcus with a group of friends. "You think you're better than us now, huh?" Jason sneered. Marcus shook his head calmly. "I don't think I'm better. I just play because I love it." Jason shoved him lightly against the table. "Well, love isn't enough. At Jefferson Music Academy, skill and reputation matter. And you don't have either." The cafeteria fell silent, all eyes on them. Marcus didn't fight back. He simply stood tall, looked Jason in the eye, and said, "Skill without heart is empty. That's why people didn't clap for you the way they did for me." The words cut deeper than any punch could. Jason's face flushed with anger, but he walked away, his pride bleeding. Over the next few weeks, Marcus's name spread beyond the academy. Videos of his performance, recorded secretly by students, found their way online. Views skyrocketed. People from across the city began asking, "Who is this boy?" Jefferson Music Academy was suddenly in the spotlight, not because of its long history, but because of Marcus. Reporters called, music scouts grew curious, and whispers of scholarship opportunities floated in the air. Principal Reynolds hated every second of it. The fame belonged to Marcus, not the institution, and that infuriated him. At staff meetings, he tried to downplay the boy's achievement, insisting it was a one-time thing. But the more he tried to suppress Marcus's success, the brighter it shone. Teachers who once remained neutral now openly defended Marcus, praising his natural genius. Some even argued that the Academy should officially support and promote him. For Reynolds, it was the ultimate humiliation. One morning, a letter arrived at the Academy addressed to Marcus. It was from a prestigious national music competition, inviting him to perform on a stage far beyond the school auditorium. His mother wept when she read it. "Marcus, this is your chance. The world is opening its doors to you." But Marcus hesitated. He remembered the whispers, the jealousy, the pressure. Was he ready for that kind of stage? Could he carry the weight of everyone's expectations? As he sat once again at the old, broken piano in the practice room, Marcus closed his eyes. The chipped keys beneath his fingers were familiar, comforting. He remembered the nights when it was just him and the music, no audience, no applause, no pressure. That was where his love had been born. He realized then that no stage, no competition, could change the reason he played. He didn't play for trophies or fame. He played because the music was part of him, and without it, he wasn't whole. At the end of that week, Marcus made a decision. He would accept the invitation, not to prove the principal wrong, not to outshine Jason, but to honor the gift he had been given, and to share it with as many hearts as possible. The announcement spread through Jefferson Music Academy like lightning. Marcus was going to perform at a national level. Students cheered, teachers beamed, but deep in his office, Principal Reynolds clenched his fists. This was no longer just a student outshining him in his own school. This was a boy on the verge of becoming something far greater than the Academy itself, a legend. The music filled the auditorium like a storm and a whisper at the same time. Each note Marcus played seemed to float through the air, linger, and then wrap around the listeners' hearts. At first, there was shock. Many of the students had folded their arms, ready to laugh at him again. But when the first melody danced across the room, their expressions softened. Their mouths, which had been curved into smirks, slowly fell open. Some even leaned forward in their seats, as though they couldn't believe their own ears. The principal, who had spoken with so much arrogance just minutes before, now looked uneasy. He shifted in his chair, his smile gone. The teachers exchanged glances, whispering to each other. The sound wasn't just music, it was alive, powerful, layered with emotion that felt far beyond Marcus's young years. It was as if every struggle he had faced, every tear his mother had wiped away, every late-night practice session on his second-hand keyboard had poured into this performance. Marcus wasn't just playing the piano. He was telling his life story without using words. His fingers moved with lightning speed, yet with a tenderness that made the notes feel like they were whispering secrets. Sometimes the music soared, as if reaching toward the sky with hope. Other times, it sank into deep, haunting tones that carried the weight of pain. He shifted between these emotions effortlessly, creating a performance so rich and layered it seemed impossible that it was coming from a boy so young. The janitor, who had been standing quietly at the back of the auditorium, felt tears sting his eyes. He had always believed in Marcus, had always encouraged him in small ways when others ignored him. To see him standing here, commanding the room with nothing but a piano, was more powerful than anything he had imagined. Then, something remarkable happened. The audience, who had been silent and tense, began to change. At first, it was just one student, leaning forward with eyes wide, nodding slightly with the rhythm. Then another, and another. Soon, the same students who had mocked Marcus earlier were completely captivated, their laughter forgotten. Some even whispered to each other, "How is he doing this? He's amazing." But Marcus wasn't playing to prove them wrong. He wasn't playing for the principal, or even the teachers. He was playing for his mother, for the nights when she had told him, "One day the world will hear your music." He was playing for himself, for the dream he had never let go of, no matter how many times people tried to break it. Halfway through, Marcus shifted into a medley of classical and jazz, blending them seamlessly. It was something no one had ever heard before, a style uniquely his own. It carried the discipline of the great composers, but also the improvisation of a soul that refused to be boxed in. He closed his eyes, his entire body moving with the rhythm, as if he and the piano were no longer separate. The principal's jaw clenched tighter with every passing second. He had underestimated this boy, thinking he was just a kid with a cheap keyboard and unrealistic dreams. But now, in front of the entire academy, Marcus was proving not just his talent, but his brilliance. The weight of the principal's own words hung heavy in the air. If this boy plays the piano, I quit. When Marcus reached the climax of his performance, the notes rose higher and higher, filling the auditorium like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. The sound was so powerful it felt like it might lift the roof right off the building. The students could no longer contain themselves. They began to clap along with the rhythm, cheering as the energy built. It was no longer just a performance. It was an eruption of passion, a moment that everyone in the room knew would be remembered forever. Finally, Marcus struck the last chord. The sound rang out, long and pure, echoing through the auditorium before fading into silence. For a moment, there was nothing but stillness. The silence was almost deafening, as if the room itself was holding its breath. And then, it happened. The entire auditorium erupted in applause. Students jumped to their feet, clapping, cheering, shouting Marcus's name. Some even whistled, their earlier mockery completely forgotten. The janitor wiped his eyes proudly, whispering to himself, "That's my boy." The teachers clapped too, some with genuine admiration, others with embarrassment for ever doubting him. But all eyes turned to the principal. He sat frozen in his chair, pale, his lips pressed tightly together. His earlier confidence had vanished. The students began to chant, "You said you'd quit. You said you'd quit." Their voices grew louder and louder, echoing through the room. Marcus, still catching his breath, didn't smile or gloat. He simply looked toward the back of the room, where his mother stood quietly, tears of pride streaming down her face. For him, this moment wasn't about making the principal resign. It was about finally being seen for who he was. A musician, a legend in the making. The chants grew louder, filling the air like thunder. The principal shifted uncomfortably, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. He realized now that his words had trapped him, that his arrogance had led him into a corner he couldn't escape from. And at that very moment, Marcus rose from the piano bench. He bowed his head slightly, the way he had seen great musicians do, and whispered into the microphone, "Thank you." The roar of applause grew even louder. It was no longer just a school performance. It was history being written in real time. The auditorium was shaking with the energy of applause and chants. Marcus stood there, tall and composed, his hands still trembling from the intensity of what he had just poured into the piano. The students wouldn't stop chanting, their voices blending into one echo. "You said you'd quit. You said you'd quit." The principal looked cornered, sweat beading on his forehead. He tried to wave his hands to quiet the students, but their energy was unstoppable. For the first time in years, the power wasn't his. It belonged to the boy he had mocked and dismissed. The weight of his own words pressed down on him like chains. He had declared in front of everyone that if Marcus could play, he would resign. And now, Marcus hadn't just played. He had delivered one of the most breathtaking performances anyone had ever heard. The teachers looked on, some with smirks, others with uneasy glances. They knew this was bigger than a performance. This was about dignity, about truth, about a student proving that talent can't be measured by color, money, or background. Marcus didn't say a word. He didn't need to. His silence was louder than any taunt. He simply stood with quiet strength, his eyes fixed on the audience, but his heart listening to the steady beat of his mother's voice in his memory. "One day, the world will hear your music." The principal finally stood, his chair screeching against the floor. The auditorium fell silent, the chants fading as everyone leaned forward to hear what he would say. His voice cracked at first, betraying his nerves. "Well, it seems, I may have spoken too quickly." He forced a laugh, but no one laughed with him. Instead, the silence grew heavier. The students weren't satisfied. "Keep your word," one boy shouted from the back. "You said you'd resign." Others joined in. The room buzzed with demands, the walls practically vibrating with the sound of rebellion. The principal's face turned red. He opened his mouth to argue, but then something unexpected happened. The academy's director, a tall woman with sharp eyes and years of authority in her voice, stood up from the far end of the auditorium. She had been watching silently the whole time, and now she walked slowly down the aisle toward the stage. The room grew quiet again, whispers rippling through the crowd. Everyone respected her. When she reached the stage, she didn't look at the students, or the teachers, or even the principal. She looked directly at Marcus. Her expression softened, and she spoke into the microphone. "Young man, what you have shown us today is nothing short of extraordinary. This academy exists to discover and nurture true talent. And today, you reminded us of what music really is: heart, discipline, and soul. You belong here." The students erupted again, this time in cheers of support. Marcus felt his chest tighten, his eyes burning with emotion. For so long, he had wondered if he belonged anywhere. And now, in front of everyone who had doubted him, someone with true authority was telling him he did. Then she turned sharply to the principal. Her voice was firm, each word landing like a hammer. "And as for you, sir, you made a promise in front of this entire academy. A leader must stand by his word. Integrity matters. If you cannot honor your own declaration, then perhaps you are not the leader this academy deserves." The crowd gasped. The principal's face drained of color. He stuttered, looking for an escape, but there was none. The students' chants returned, louder than ever. "Resign! Resign! Resign!" Defeated, the principal lowered his head. With trembling hands, he removed his name badge and placed it on the chair beside him. The room exploded with cheers. It was over. His arrogance had cost him his position, and the boy he had mocked was now the very reason for his downfall. Marcus stood frozen, unable to process what had just happened. The director placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "This is only the beginning for you, Marcus. With discipline and the right guidance, you will go far. Your name will not just be remembered here, it will echo far beyond these walls." His mother, standing at the back, broke down in tears. The janitor, too, wiped his eyes with his sleeve, whispering, "That boy just changed history." From that day forward, Marcus was no longer just a poor kid with a second-hand keyboard. He became the pride of the academy, the student who had humbled arrogance with pure talent. News of the performance spread beyond the school. Parents spoke of it. Local musicians came to see him, and eventually, whispers reached the ears of talent scouts. But Marcus never let the praise change him. He still practiced late into the night, still poured his soul into every note, and still remembered the look on his mother's face when she had first told him to dream. And as for the principal, he left the academy quietly, his career in ruins. People remembered his words not as authority, but as the spark that revealed a legend. Years later, when Marcus performed on the world's greatest stages, audiences would gasp at his brilliance. They would call him a prodigy, a genius, a legend. But those who knew the truth remembered that it all began in a dusty old-school auditorium, where a boy silenced an entire room and proved that greatness cannot be denied. And in that moment, on that stage, Marcus didn't just play the piano. He rewrote the story of his life. Marcus proved that true talent cannot be denied. His story reminds us, never stop believing in yourself. If this inspired you, don't forget to hit the like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories that touch the heart. Your support helps us bring more stories like this to life.